Hi, so let's delve into Revelation then, and we're going to be looking at chapters 1 to 3, most of which is taken up with the 7 letters to the 7 churches. And I suppose we're quite relaxed about this bit to a certain extent because we're used to letters, aren't we, in our Bibles? We're used to the epistles that are written to churches like Ephesians and the Romans and so forth. And so it becomes quite comfortable for us, but we have to realize that even in these chapters, and certainly very much for the rest of Revelation, you've got a particular type of literature called apocalyptic literature, and that word is bandied around an awful lot these days. People use it to mean destruction and all the rest of it. That's not actually the meaning. And apocalyptic literature would have been quite well known to the people that John was writing to at the time and the place where he wrote it. In the ancient world, it was quite clear. To us today in this century, we have much less understanding of it. So just to say a few things about that, it's a type of Jewish literature that you'd find in, of course, Revelation, but Daniel and Ezekiel have got bits in there as well. 4 Ezra and 1 Enoch, those 2 books you won't find in most of our Bibles, but it's also some in there as well. And its function was to help people of God in times of crisis, to help them through and so on. And the one description of it is put this way, and I think this is perhaps helpful, is that it is, I'll read you the quote, symbolic visions that reveal a heavenly perspective on history in the light of its final outcome. Okay, so it's symbolic visions. There is symbolism in there. It gives a perspective from God's point of view, if you like, on history in light of the final outcome, what is actually going to happen. And we need to understand before we get too carried away that it's written to people that John knew. And it brings Old Testament prophecy to a climax. It's not Revelation, it's not jumped on the end of the Bible. It is steeped in Old Testament prophecy as well. And you can see that all the way through it. And John is deliberately bringing in pictures from the Old Testament, from the books like Daniel and so on, Ezekiel, whatever. It's in there. He's brought that in, and it helps you to understand, to interpret the book when you understand that. It may well say a lot about the future, but please let's understand it's anchored in its real time as well, particularly these letters to the churches. And if you went on a postman's route, almost from Ephesus, and went for a trip around, you could go to each of those 7 churches in turn, and it's like that's the way that it's been written. Probably written about the time of persecution under the Emperor Domitian, but that is debatable. Lots of views about the actual timing of Revelation. So looking at Revelation, we'll just start with Revelation. I'm only going to pick some verses out, but Revelation chapter 1 and verse 3 is actually very important. It says this, it says, "Blessed is the one who reads the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear it and take to heart what is written in it, because the time is near." So we have to understand then that, first of all, it would have been read out often. So those who hear the words of this prophecy, as well as those that read it, and it was meant to be read out. But you need to take it to heart. That's the point. It was about changing you as you read it. It was about discipleship. It was about having an effect on you. It's not just about reading it or trying to interpret some strange idea from it, a future prediction or whatever, which some people want to do. It's a call to stand fast. There's talk then about the 7 lights or lampstands in verse 12. That would refer to the 7 churches then, and it would remind you of a similar picture if you look at Zechariah chapter 4 and verse 2, where it talks about a similar sort of thing. Again, images from the Old Testament. You've got Jesus arrives here dressed rather like a priest in the temple, and he's described as a son of Adam, which again you'd find in Daniel chapter 7. That's where that term comes from. So it's deliberate, so we can see this meaning of John's vision by looking at other dreams and visions in the Bible. And as I've said before, the Bible is one of the best ways of interpreting the Bible. Okay. Now, some have seen these 7 churches as the church, the worldwide church of God, over 7 ages or dispensations. And from that term, you'll understand that itself is a dispensational view. If you follow dispensational teaching, it's seen as looking at 7 ages that the church will go through over the period of time until Jesus comes back. So, you could look at it and say, well, we are now in, the Church of Sardis era, or we're now in the Laodicean era, or whatever, and it's seen as that. Now, I don't see any side of that. I believe that this is very clearly written to the churches at the time, and there are certainly signs that's what it was. And are there echoes for today? Well, of course there are. And what I think that you have there is errors as well as good things that churches and individuals can fall into in any era, in any place. So it's got a message to the church and to the individuals, because the church is the people, all the way through, from when it was first written right up to now and into the future as well. There's going to be a message there. The form of the letters is very similar for each one. So I've got down here, you've normally got an address to the guardian angel or the messenger of the church. You've got a description of Christ, follows then commendation, what they've done well. I have this for you, you do this. Then some condemnation, but this I have against you, you get this wrong. Then there's a challenge, an exhortation, perhaps a warning or whatever. And then a promise to those who conquer, those who are faithful to the end, a promise of what will happen, and an invitation often at the end to listen to what the Spirit is saying. So that's very common all the way through. And it would be good for us to look at each of these churches. I challenge you to do that and look at, how does this fit in for you and your lifestyle? We can certainly, as church leaders, it's something we have to look at seriously about the church and be aware of not falling into these errors. But what about us as individuals as well? Whether we're church leaders or what we are. Have we lost our first love? Are we lukewarm? Are we compromising the truth? All those things came in. And churches can develop a collective spirit that God would want to deal with and would want us to be aware of. And it's very easy to fall into some of these errors, trying to compromise perhaps with the spirit of the age and fit in and so on. We have to be careful of all these things. But also, let's look at the positive traits here as well. Are there things there that God is encouraging the churches about that he could say about us? Wouldn't that be lovely? He should be able to say those things about us, So, what do they have? Very briefly, and people have done whole charts on this, but I'm going to make it very simple for you, because I'm a very simple guy anyway. Ephesus, lack of mutual love. That's what it was, mainly for them. With Pergamon, they accommodated wrong doctrine. Very easy to do if you don't keep close to what the word says and you just pulled in by the spirit of the age. Thyatira, again, accommodation to avoid social disempowerment and economic disempowerment. We can go along with things because we don't want to be pushed out of the world. We don't want to be ignored or whatever, or laughed at, if you like. And it talks there about Jezebel, who became a symbol of tolerance and compromise. So, but you can't do that. You have to follow God's word, whatever, all the way through. Sardis, presumption. You're reputed to be alive, but you're dead. That must have been a shock to them. People said, oh, what a lively church it is. No, you're not. God says you're dead. You're not there. Laodicea, misguided prosperity, self-sufficiency, idolatrous, and so on. You know, they were known as Laodicea was known as prosperous, a financial center, but God says, no, actually, you're poor. You are poor. So, Gorman, who I've mentioned before, has summarized these letters for us, and I think this would be useful. I'll just read this to you. It's like if God was to summarize these 3 chapters, this might be what he'd say. Because I love you and I want you to share in the new creation that's about to appear, I am calling you to hold on to your faithful public witness to me, or else repent and renew it. As I said previously, beware of false prophets, and not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Or as I say later, come out and stay out. For as I promised before I left you, I, the risen and victorious one, am with you always to the end of the age. So it's a challenge, isn't it, to get lives right, and to get churches right, and to be walking the right way in the light of what is to come and the persecution that we will go through and are going through, and churches always go through, and the temptations and so on, the struggles. So it's important that we look at our foundations, both, you know, as individuals as well as churches, and, you know, make sure that we're not compromising and we're living the right way and so on. And I spoke about foundations on Sunday, and I mentioned the city of Sardis, which the story goes that the city was built on top of a very high, steep cliff and felt absolutely safe from attack. They got quite complacent that there was no way that they could be invaded. And so as it was, they didn't bother to keep checking their walls, their foundations and so on. And over a period of time, cracks began to appear in the base of their walls. And eventually those cracks got larger and larger over time until they were large enough for human beings to be able to actually get through. And of course, one night, army did manage to scale the walls. They found a way, scale the cliff, and they got into the city and overran it. And it was a whole thing about being careful of our foundations and so on. And, you know, God knew each of those churches individually, and because he loved them and because he loves us, he wants us to be in that place where we can be strong so that we can withstand whatever comes against us. And there's constantly persecution that goes on in some way or another. There are things that we have to battle through, and he's encouraging us to keep going in the face of whatever that would happen to be. And you know, you can take Laodicea as well as a city, for example, and if you read the letter to Laodicea, one of the things he says is to buy gold refined in the fire, to wear white clothes, and to put salve on their eyes. And it's very interesting that this is a city that took pride in its financial wealth. It had an extensive textile industry, and one of the things that it made was an eye salve, which was famous. So there is a message to that individual church at that time. And God says in chapter 3, verse 19, those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline. Of course, God's discipline is because he loves us and he wants us strong. That's all it's about. And he cares for us. And it says to those that endure to the end, there is going to be a new heaven and a new earth. Now, that is good reason for hope. We will continue to look at this next time and look at the next few chapters. God bless you.